Welcome, everybody. This is Martin King and my co-host,
Jim O'Malley.
Jim O'Malley. This is our second episode of our series. We're covering The College Scam by author Charlie Kirk. We're going through and reviewing this book. We're digging into the data, and we're trying to share with skilled trade folks out there about what's happening in the educational business and how that is potentially impacting people making decisions to try out skilled trades. So we're trying to bust open the narrative that's been floated around for many generations now about skilled trades are dirty and they don't pay very well. So we're going to try to at least punch some holes in the educational narrative if we can. So this is our second episode, as I mentioned. If you missed the first episode, make sure you check it out on iTunes, all the different podcast networks, as well as YouTube. skilledtraderescue.com is where the home is for all of our content. I hope you get a chance to check it out. A couple updates for you before we get into this episode. I am making a change to the Tell Your Story in Skilled Trades series that I've been doing for quite some time now. We're actually getting out in the field. We're trying to collect real live data, real live content from real skilled trade professionals in the field. If you'd like to participate and get on the podcast and tell your story about how skilled trades has affected your life and what your experience is, definitely give me a call. Best thing is probably do is just send me an email, mking@skilledtraderescue.com, or connect up with me on LinkedIn, and I'll give you more details about it. But we need to get the message out there, guys. We really do, about what's happening and boots on the ground, what the experiences are out there, and getting your stories out is the best way to do it. So what's up there, Jim? Welcome to the show. And we got lots of stuff today. We're doing our second installment. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's getting exciting because every time we take a week in between one of these, I go out and do more research, and now I got more stuff on my desk. So there's so much information out there. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, so if you guys don't know this, Jim has a long history in the education process. So if you get a chance to check Jim O'Malley out on LinkedIn, he's got a really good profile in there, and you'll get an understanding, I think, as you listen to Jim, that he does know what he's talking about when it comes to the educational process. So he's got, it's actually kind of scary, all the stuff you're digging up here, Jim.
Well, yeah. Because what's scary to me is it's right out there in front of everybody if you just go look at it.
Right. You want to dig for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays, what we have to do is do the work ourselves. The media used to do this for us, but they don't do that anymore. So it takes.
Oh, they do part of it.
Yeah, they do part of it. No kidding. So what we're covering today in this episode is the cost of education, how it's become ridiculously overpriced, and that's from the Kirk book. And basically what Kirk is getting at is the burden that the cost of education is putting on the students going into college, and by extension, the parents, many cases. So we're going to be covering that today in the podcast, and we've got some really interesting data. I'm going to start out with some stuff that maybe people haven't heard about before. So back in 2015, there were some changes in politics and policy when it comes to the financing of college, and I'm going to have Jim speak to that. This is some of his material that Jim came up with, and I vaguely remember this stuff, and it's really not talked about too much. But why don't you get into this? What happened with the Obama administration, the watershed moment that happened back in 2015?
Well, I think it started back basically before that. Average cost, I mean, when they first started dealing, when Obama first went into office in 2010, I think it was, he signed an executive order that basically took over all of the requirements for student financing and student loans into the government, and took it basically away from the banks. So then what it came down to is that the federal government stepped in and said, we guarantee all student loans, so that the banks could just dole out the money however they wanted to. And if the loan went south, the government, taxpayer would pay for it, basically. And then later in 2015, he signed a bill which was the Student Bill of Rights, I guess they called it, and it basically listed all of the different things that colleges couldn't do to and with students, and put it all under the federal government. So basically, what happened in his years in office was that one of the things, other than a few other things that were of notable mention, like Obamacare and stuff. But anyway, what he did is he basically took out of the hands of private industry and the banks and the colleges, basically, the financing, the student loan financing, and moved it all under the government. And with that, of course, there are always strings that come attached. So basically what has happened, even though I can't find facts in there, I know it's there, but I just haven't found specific statements yet, that basically the government then turned around and say to the colleges what you will and won't do in some areas. And I think that'll come to light as time goes by. But the Student Bill of Rights bill that he signed in 2015 basically took over all the student loans and all of the financing, Pell Grants and everything, and put them under the federal government.
If you're considering working in skilled trades, or perhaps now are working in skilled trades, or maybe you're a business owner who needs skilled trade labor to make your business work, this is an important message. We've discovered that the U.S. government, particularly through the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov, has been underreporting skilled trade wage data by 30 to 60%. So the hourly wages that they report are significantly lower than reality. And there's many reasons for this. We have some videos out on that if you want to check it out on our YouTube channel, but that's just a fact. So what we're trying to do is get Congress to make some changes at the BLS and start changing their policies as to how they collect data. They're currently using mail-in surveys to U.S. businesses, which is basically junk mail. And if they don't get enough surveys back, what they're doing is extrapolating, and that's why we have what we have nowadays. So let's solve this problem together, and to start that process out, we have to get the correct data out to people that are making life decisions. So do your part by going to skilledtraderescue.com, go to wage surveys at the top of each one of our pages, and take 3 minutes to fill out the survey. Your information is completely confidential. It goes into a big pot of information. You'll be able to actually see the survey results for the cumulative of people that have filled out the survey on the website. And hopefully once we get to critical mass, around 10,000 entries, we're going to go to work. We're going to get together with our coalition of the willing and get in front of Congress, hopefully, and get some changes so we can eliminate this significant headwind we have to face for decades now at finding new talent, getting them into an amazing career. Well, that's it for this message. Thanks so much for listening, and let's get back to our podcast. So the banks are still loaning the money. Right. The only difference is the banks now have a backstop for whatever reason. If the student disappears, vanishes off the face of the earth, just says, I'm not paying my bills anymore, the government is on the hook. Well, we the people is on the hook for it now.
Yeah, and then part of that too is that in that same process, the student loan and your student loans, if you have one, you can't get out of them by declaring bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. They're protected from bankruptcy, so that even if you declare bankruptcy, you still have student loans, and you still have to. So that way, people couldn't get out of their student loans by just declaring bankruptcy. And when you talk about student loans, you're talking, in those days, and that hasn't been that many years ago. In those days, though, a kid could come through a 4-year college and get out the other end with a baccalaureate degree, and either move on to a graduate degree or stay, go out there and go to work. And they probably could get through that process and maybe, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000. Parents usually tried to save that kind of money up to pay for it so they didn't have to get loans. So let's say 20,000. Well, that 20,000 now is 60,000, because as soon as this thing went in, two things happened. The college just said, well, hell, we're not restricted now. We can just keep jacking the tuition and fees up, because nobody's going to stop us. The government's going to give them the money. It doesn't matter. So the inflation rate, if the inflation rate was 2 or 3%, the inflation rate on tuition was 10 to 15% each year. And it just kept going up and up. So
yeah, the 2% you're referring to is a consumer price index, basically the economy, the economic inflation rate versus the college tuition and expenses inflation rate.
Right. And that's what I heard whoever the big shot is now over the Fed say the other day. That's their target on inflation, is to get it back down to 2% and hold it at 2%. Well, 2% it'd be fine, but that isn't what the colleges have been doing. They saw green light.
It's interesting. It makes me think about when we're looking at what happened between 2010 and 2015. It kind of reminds me of the real estate bubble, because if you think about it, that's what happened. There was cheap money out there. The government, these banks, they knew just by the sheer volume that they were rolling out loans to people that couldn't afford the loans in the first place. But they ultimately knew, if we make this bubble big enough, the government's going to have to come in, and if this thing blows up, which it did, that we the people, the federal government, would come in and bail the whole situation out, which they did. And it seems to me the same kind of thing, because when you had the lending for student loans privatized, you were forcing the banks to look at each loan. Does this individual have the ability to repay said loan? And there was guardrails, right? There was a guardrail on the whole scenario. And when the federal government comes in and says, all right, well, we'll guarantee all these loans, what they did was they lifted all the risks, or much of the risk, off the banks. So the banks were like, do they pay the loan back? We don't care.
Nope.
We don't care. Yeah. So I could totally see that scenario where the colleges are like, okay, so we know we have to, in order to feed this machine, and we're going to talk in a little while about exactly what Jim's talking about with this growth and costs. We know we need to feed this machine of the college experience, this college complex that's evolved over the years. So in order to do that, we have to get butts in the seat. So we now know that the students can get in and they have access willy-nilly. They're almost printing their own money. And so they can set the price. I would argue, and I think this goes on, and guys, we're trying to dig this up, but I believe there's price fixing. We got hints of it through this big lawsuit that Jim and I talked about last week. There's been some hints of what's going on. There's a court case dealing with Asian American students that we went into detail last week about, that was getting basically they were getting hosed. And these details came out in this court case about these major Ivy League colleges that were fixing their prices. And do you think they stopped that after that case went through?
No, they still haven't.
Probably not. They're still doing it.
They consider themselves, basically, inert as far as being out there and having any kind of culpability for any of this kind of stuff. They're kind of their own little entity out there, especially the big Ivy Leagues and so on. They're sitting there, Harvard and all them. They don't care. We got more money and we got sense. So, what are you going to do to us? And, they've not only price fixed, they not only sit down with 14 of the different universities that are listed in that one lawsuit, and, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, Princeton, you name it, it's in there, Columbia, all of them. And they basically said, okay, look, we're going to price fit. We're going to say everybody's tuition is going to go up by this amount, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, we're going to reduce the number of students that we're taking in, and we're going to focus primarily on the students that are financially capable of taking care of themselves, so we don't have to touch our endowment funds to bail any of these students out as far as student aid goes. So they went from averaging 25, 30, 35% acceptance for freshmen each year down to, 6, 8, 9%. And, that was their collusion. They worked together on that to do it. I still think there was some collusion, or at least there was some joint discussions, I would say, with colleges and college finance people and the government over this whole student loan thing, but I can't prove it. So all I can do is, make somebody upset because by saying it, but there it is.
Well, I was watching Bill O'Reilly the other night, probably 2 weeks ago, and it was so interesting because he's independent, but the left does not like him. Anyway,
no, never did.
So yeah, and I'd love to get him on the show one of these days. But he just as a amazing, interesting point, he just happened to bring up what's going on with college education and his kids. So he has a couple of kids that are newly minted college students, and he's pretty well known. What's that?
I said his kids had grown up, because when he was on Fox, his kids were pretty small then. But
yeah, they're off to college now, and I just blew my mind. He said on his show that one of the Ivy League schools, which would not be named, which I get, he said that they had a low acceptance rate, but he actually got a call from the school administrators. And they basically said, look, we can forego all of the, we can guarantee that your son will get in this college if you're willing to donate. And they gave him an amount.
Yep.
And, they know he's a wealthy guy, right? But there's calls like that all the time going out, right?
Yeah. And that's his kids are the kind of students that they're targeting, because then they're still collecting. All of their tuitions and everything, percentages of them go into these, to break out for student financial aid and stuff like that. So it goes right into the endowment along with all of these donations that are coming in. And, if they can, even though they're charging the tuition, and part of that tuition, percentage of it's going into that endowment for student aid, if they can get students that don't need that aid, that money stays there. It doesn't go back to the student. So the money stays there in the endowment fund, and that's basically what they're doing. The people that they're getting to donate is what's scary, because Bill O'Reilly, he can afford to do it. But how about the country of China, who's put billions of dollars into our college systems around the country? Billions with a B. And
yeah,
why? Why are they doing that?
Well, because they know they're getting a big payback.
They're getting a payback, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit in this discussion, and Jim and I are going to highlight one of the glaring challenges that there are, especially for skilled trades right now, is how to get accurate information about what's going on in the colleges. And this is just going to be kind of one example. I talk about this all the time about, let's say you've got a son or a daughter that is in high school and they're getting ready to graduate, and those difficult conversations start to come up, where the parents and the family like, so Sally or John, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? That uncomfortable conversation that always comes up. Yeah. And
move out of my house.
Yeah, get out of my house. No, anyway, but it's really interesting that conversation is harder than it's ever been before, because the information that's floating around, especially in the go-to places where everybody goes for information, is Google or some search engine, and or probably worse, I would argue, going to the high school guidance counselor, because the whole system, in my opinion, this is my honest opinion, that the whole system is rigged towards encouragement to go to college. And this is the narrative that I brought up earlier in this episode, that it's just so difficult to get good information. So we're going to give up one example here. So Jim, why don't you share with us about this data that you dug up on Georgetown? And so Jim's going to talk about this data he dug up specific to Georgetown University, which is a big school, very popular school. And then I'm going to share some information on a graphic that we found about that was actually provided by our government, which anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. So Jim, let's talk about this stuff you found on Georgetown, the cost of increasing what the tuition's gone up according to Georgetown.
Yeah, according to Georgetown University, they basically said between 1980 and 2020, the average price of tuition, fees, and room and board for an undergraduate degree increased 169%. And that's a heck of a big number, 169%, according to recent reports from Georgetown and the workforce. So college tuition inflation averaged 4.6% annually from 2010 to 2020, while at the same time the cost of tuition at a public four-year institution increased 31.4%. So the average, for schools around the country, the tuition average was 4.63% annually in that 10 years period. And at the same time, tuition into public four-year institutions increased 31.4% from that same time. So by 2019, 2020, the total price increased to $28,775, or 180% increase. So that's Georgetown. Now, Georgetown's saying that's based on their information, and I'm sure it's based on their information at Georgetown, I would imagine. I mean,
it has to be. And you know what? Just looking at that paragraph as you said it, to me that's word salad. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's so interesting. When the data comes out, you get past, and this is great data, but I don't believe it for a minute. I don't believe what that data is for 1 second, because
I read that and it sounded like a Kamala Harris speech or something.
It's exactly right. Yeah, most people, and I think that's part of the design of this type of this data, it's word salad. Most people look at that and go, what? That doesn't make any sense.
No.
So this is one extreme, I think. And then the next thing, and those of you that are looking at this or watching this podcast episode, you'll have an advantage here. So if you haven't checked this out, if you're listening, you might want to check out the video. And I'll put this up. So I'm going to put this up on the video portion of it. So what I've got here is a graphic that's put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which I have serious challenges with, if you've heard my podcast. But this is a graphic that they put out. So this is at the other end of what Jim talked about. This is this counters what Georgetown is claiming about their particular campus. This is nationally. And what this graphic is showing is that from 1980 to 2020, so a 40-year block of time, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is inflation. So when you hear the term, the inflation rate is this, that's what that number is. Over that 40-year stretch of time, the inflation came up 236%. Now that sounds a lot, but you got to remember that's over a 40-year block of time. Not bad, I think. So over that same block of time, tuition costs for college have gone up 1,200%. So it really points out that the rate of inflation and cost of college, it's just not in sync with each other. So if you're a business and you're looking at the cost of a particular, let's say your insurance prices, your insurance goes up every year typically. If it goes up, at 1,200% versus inflation rate at 236% over the same amount of time, you got a big problem. You won't be able to stay in business if that was a business cost, right? So it's really interesting. And what Jim brought up early in this podcast episode about the what happened between 2010 and 2015, you can clearly see on this chart that right around 2010, 2011, you'll see that the trajectory of that increase went way up, which gives me a little bit of credibility on this particular graphic that what happened when the school loans went from a privatized system where the banks were taking all the risk to a government, we the people backed operation. It's pretty clear on this graph. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I broke it down a little further for you. 236% over 40 years is 5.9% average per year, whereas 1,200% over 40 years is 30%. So while CPI was going up 5.9 on the average, college tuition was going up 30% on the average per year. That's quite a bit.
Right.
And I think it shows clearly that there was, I think between the media and everything that we as a country sold the world on, college was the only way you were going to be successful and the only way you could make a big, good living. Between that and the government making changes in finance system and everything like that has just set fire to the fact that all of this tuition and fees and everything is just based on them being greedy and getting all the money they can. But in fact, it doesn't. If your costs are going up 5.9% a year and you're going up 30% a year, you're putting some money away somewhere. And it's called in the endowment funds, basically. Right.
Well, another number that shocked me, Jim, was when in the research that we did was the entire college complex, all the money that goes into the college. That's the tuitions, the books, the fees, everything connected to the college experience in just America. The amount of revenue, the amount of money that exchange hands every year comes out to $678 billion. That's per year. And that's just shocking to me. And all the while, while all that money's going into the college experience, the debt load for parents and for the college students, last I checked, is 1.7 trillion. And I think it's probably going to be 1.8 trillion, I think, very soon here. So this system's broken. In my opinion, it's stayed right.
It's gone from being an opportunity and a service, and country-wise, economically and everything. It's gone from being a entity in our country that makes it better, makes people smarter, makes people more employable. And it's gone from that to big business. The money matters more than anything. The kids don't matter. They take kids in. If they make it, fine. If they don't, they still have a loan. It's all based around the money part of it at this point. Then you add in the latest over the years of this increased activity, this increased indoctrination movements and so on like that in these colleges. It's, I don't know how much longer they're going to stay in business. I wouldn't think. I got to think the American people will see through this eventually. I don't know. I could be wrong because they prove me wrong about every 4 years, but.
Yeah. Well, before we switch gears, Jim and I jump over to some new data that Jim came up with. I want to also let everybody know I've got a couple other graphics that I'm going to put into the episode video that gives further breakdown. So the average cost of tuition over time, which is in addition to that first graphic. And the second graphic, or the third graphic for this episode, is going to be the delinquency of loans. So I talk about basically what this report breaks down is the delinquency of mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, and student loan. And it's interesting that the student loans is comparable. That's delinquencies, people that are not paying back their debt, is right up there with credit card debt. So it's very, very interesting on how that's going about. And basically what happens is if a student doesn't pay his or her loan back, they'll eventually have to pay it. There's no way to bankrupt out of it as you could with, say, credit card debt. But ultimately, I don't know what the rules are, how it all works out. But ultimately, if that loan becomes too delinquent, I believe that the federal government basically pays the financial institution, the bank that made that loan, and then now the federal government owns that loan. I believe that's ultimately what happens to it.
Exactly. Yeah. What happens is the bank says this person is not paying back their loan. It's in default. The government steps in and assumes the loan, pays the bank. The bank walks off with their money. Now you owe the government that money. So anytime you have any kind of a refund coming, a tax refund or whatever, they take it until you pay that back. So you'll never get out from under that loan until it's paid off. Oh, by the way, the interest rates are horrendous compared to normal day interest rates too.
Right.
So you're stuck. Period.
So last week, we're gonna wrap up this week's episode with some additional information that sort of bolts on to what we covered last week. And last week we covered in depth that the college experience of old is not the college experience of new. And Jim came up with some additional, interesting information about the types of degrees and stuff like that. So, Jim, why don't you highlight this additional stuff you came up with? I found it so interesting.
Well, I dug into it with Prep Scholar. Prep Scholar came out with a report on it in 2022 that was titled basically "Beware of Worst College Majors," and it lists them down here in several different categories. Number one category is unemployment rates in those different areas. The other one is starting salary rates, and then the third one is comparing both, so that you're looking at absolutely the worst ones. And there's a couple of things in here that keep appearing. And the number one major that the number one highest unemployment rate, they came out and said that basically if you have a high school diploma, the average unemployment rate is 10%. This was in August of 2022. And they said the average unemployment rate, if you have a college graduate, you have a college degree, is 4%. Now, I find that a little hard to believe, but that's, you got to take it for what they put in there. So, all right. The number one major area that you want to stay away from is for unemployment or for employability is physics.
Right. College degree physics. Yeah. I was actually blown away at that. That's very interesting.
Kind of a science. Yeah. And then mass media is 7.3%. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, mass media, isn't that all these people that are selling all this crap? Then they list one that's called miscellaneous technologies. What is that? What is that? Is that computers? They got computer science down there. Computer science is one of them that you want to stay away from. It's 5.2%. And then you've got the normal ones that I always talk about, the 4-year degrees in nothing, like fine arts and interdisciplinary studies. There's another one that scratches your head and go, what? Ethnic studies is 5.9%. I thought that was a big thing right now, but apparently not. Then you start looking at the BLS data on starting salaries. And according to BLS, a college graduate in 2021, the starting salary was about $55,260 a year. And that was based on BLS data. Now, if you had a degree, if you finished a degree, oh, by the way, just stepping back for a minute, unemployment, anthropology was 6%. Okay, so anyway, now we're beginning to look at starting salary. Family and consumer science, what is that? How to be a family or what? I don't know. 32,300. Anthropology, again, 33,600. Okay, so those are starting salaries if you have a 4-year degree. What happened to the 55,000? I don't know.
Well, there's got to be a couple of outlier jobs that bring that up to 55,000. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and some of these you could, early childhood education. Now, my guess is that's a lot of everything from daycare centers, which I want people that know what they're doing and if they're going to take care of my Brett. And number one, and then number two, but they only, they don't pay them a lot, 34,000. Theology and religion. Okay. It's not flawed, obviously, but, 34,000. Social services, general social sciences. I'm not sure what general means, but okay. Leisure and hospitality. There's a good one. Anyway, you go down through that list, and right at the bottom of the list at 35,000 starting a year is this thing called liberal arts. Well, I'm confused then because Harvard, Princeton, all of those colleges, their whole undergraduate program, they'll tell you, is based around liberal arts. If you're going to go to Harvard and get a 4-year degree at Harvard in liberal arts, you're not going to be making 55,000 a year. I wouldn't think.
Well, even if you are, so if you take 55,260, which is what BLS is saying, and I think you and I are on board with not believing that. But anyway, so 55,260 divided by 2,080 hours, that's how many hours in a typical work year. That comes to 26.56 per hour, right? I can tell you a lot of markets where 26.56 an hour is not that good. Yeah. And I would also say that with a lot of accuracy, we're collecting more data on this all the time. Most of these skilled trade jobs, the most popular ones, welding, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, a lot of these technicians that are starting right in the apprenticeship programs, first year, just getting in, they're starting in the 20s now in a lot of major markets around the U.S.
Yeah, and a first-year apprentice is set up in a trade like that is set up at 20%. So what it means is that if the journeyman is making $50 an hour, the first-year apprentice starts at 25, and the next year they keep moving up. After 5 years, they go up 20% each year. After 5 years, they're at that journeyman level. So, yeah, it's the apprenticeship programs are starting kids out more than these folks are starting out after spending all kinds of money in 4-year degree. But liberal arts is supposed to be this overwhelming area that covers almost everything that's not skill specific, like medical or where those are all vocational programs. I know. Those kind of things. But, if liberal arts is such a great thing, then how come you don't start out at 55,000? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then the last category is comparing both the unemployment and starting salaries. And the 4 worst ones there, I guess number 1 is anthropology. For God's sakes, don't send your kid to become an anthropologist. And mass media is right behind them. Fine arts and English language. Now, I don't understand that. I thought that was, is that a teacher? It must be a teacher because I know teachers don't start out much more than that a year anyway, about 3,000. Yeah. So,
the other thing that I've been talking about lately quite a bit is AI. AI is going to be a major disruptor. And I don't know what these colleges are going to do because, first of all, AI is causing just havoc in the educational process because it's getting so good now. The college, actually, even in the public schools, it's so good now that it used to be in the old days that, well, the old days, I'm talking 5 years ago. The student if they plagiarize stuff off the internet, they copy and paste and create a paper, right, and they submit it. The teachers used to have, these applications they could run on the web that would identify specific text that student grabbed off the internet and stuck into a paper.
Right.
Well, nowadays, like GPT chat, just that, and that's just at the infant stages right now. It's nowhere near what it's going to be in the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. These teachers are having a hell of a time because all you have to do is put in an instruction into the model, and it spits out information, and the algorithms they used to use don't work. So I don't know what they're doing, but one of the things I've been talking about is AI as it evolves. Anything that has to do with the brain and the mind and computation and writing, that's going to be a thing of the past. That AI applications are going to be able to do the work of 10 people.
Right.
And if you're especially if you're in mass media, and you write articles and things like that, you're toast. You better find something else to do. Right. Political science, all this stuff.
That's the that's where the hands-on, that's where the skill training for hands-on instruction or vocational or tech or whatever you want to call it nowadays to make it sound better. Mm-hmm. That's where AI is they're not going to be able to. I saw a report last night, I think it was or yesterday, I guess it was on one of the channels, and they were talking about how AI was going to take over firefighting. Wildland firefighting, and back in the days when Smokey was still a cub, why I used to do that. And
was Smokey born then?
Yeah.
Sorry. You shouldn't say stuff like that.
Actually, he, if I remember correctly, the history on it, he came around about the same time I did. So about 1937, I think it was, somewhere in there.
That was just too easy, Jim. Too easy.
They said, well, that was their lead, and it's going to take over firefighting. Well, yeah. Okay, so I got to watch this story now and see how they're going to do that. Well, they said, well, they're going to have all of this. AI is going to do all of this fire finding. They're going to set up. They got cameras, thousands of cameras scattered around, and they're going to watch for smoke, and they're going to be able to get the information to the firefighters sooner and quicker, and the firefighters will be able to get there sooner and quicker. And but they don't replace the firefighter. Right. All they're doing is replacing the discovery of the fire, and they're saying, "Oh, we're going to replace firefighting." No, you're not.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
not anytime soon.
Yeah. No time soon. Yeah. Because what I've been talking about, matter of fact, I'm doing some videos on this right now. It's not going to happen. AI is not going to take over for skilled trades until AI has the ability to make the jump between the virtual world and the physical world, meaning that, if you, and what I'm talking about is robots. Now, they have robots now. I mean, man, most of the stuff that's mass produced nowadays, if they want to make a profit, they've got robots that, lift off one table and stick it on another and do welding and all that stuff.
Right.
But I think that it's going to be some time before we have robots walking around amongst us that have the ability to walk up and say, well, sir, I believe that toilet is plugged. Yep. Right. And have the ability to reason, okay, what do I need to fix said toilet? Right. And I don't see that happening for quite some time.
Exactly. I think that's, but this whole liberal arts thing, there's been a couple of things that have happened to the liberal arts degree. Liberal arts study was to help students develop strong foundational competencies. This is from it's from a Forbes. Forbes said this: liberal arts study is to help students develop strong foundational competencies that give graduate tools to succeed beyond their first job. However, today most colleges are spending more time indoctrinating students into the Marxist ideology than teaching traditional liberal arts skills. So it's being, the concept of liberal arts is not bad. It's just being ignored and it's being replaced. And it's easily done because it's so generalized. I say, well, I'm teaching them how to understand what's going on in society. Well, okay, fine, but you can do that. You can do that by teaching them the skill, not teaching them how to be a good little commie. So, when we were talking about the worst, the worst group of majors to stay away from. They went on in their study and said, posting. The posting goes on to say that you might have chosen a major requirement that requires a graduate degree to become successful. What? I mean, so what you're saying is that 4 years of draining everybody's money out of their pocket and indoctrinating them into the world of Marxism isn't enough. You want 6 or 8. Is that what we're saying now? And if that's the case, then why wouldn't you be telling the kid up front when they come out of high school, you're not going to do this in 4 years. You're going to have a graduate degree to get there. And why wouldn't you change it? What good's a bachelor's degree if it's not going to help you be successful?
Well, and I would argue, we covered this last week, even most of the degrees, the undergraduate degrees that used to take 4 years, now are on average, I think was one of the stats we looked at, on average, 58% of the people take up to 6 years to get that 4-year degree. So if you're talking a graduate, postgraduate degree, right, that's going to probably take closer to 8.
I think what they're going to have to do is, and they're going to have to build into tuition a donation to retirement, so that when the kids go into college for 20 years, they can get a retirement out of it when they actually graduate. I mean, I don't know any other way to do it. They went on, the Burning Glass, which is another organization that they came out and said they found that of 21 majors reported, Homeland Security, law enforcement, firefighting related protective services were 65 unemployment rate, 65%. So those people with those degrees, 65% of them can't find a job. And in the Parks, Recreation, Leisure, and Fitness Studies, 63%. So, and even after 5 more years, so they looked at them and when they graduated and that first year to see if they could find a job, 63% of them said they couldn't find a job. And then 5 more years, they went back and looked at them again and showed that the underemployment rate for park, recreation, leisure, fitness was still at 47%. So 5 years later, their degree was worthless. Well, by that time, they probably settled into whatever, holding the hand of a robot at Ford Motor or something. I don't know. But I mean, they did say that a high percentage of college graduates, 43%, were unemployed, period, all of them, initially taking jobs that did not require a college degree. So they're working at Walmart or whatever, which is fine. I mean, Walmart's okay. The report found that those graduated with majors in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, this new STEM thing as they got it, they were least likely to experience unemployment. The STEM majors still had about 30% of their graduates underemployed. So even if you're doing a major in one of those science areas or whatever, you're still struggling with that.
So yeah. The moral of the story here, Jim, is that what we talked about in this episode today is that anybody if you're thinking about going to college, definitely do not 100% rely on information that is dropped in your lap. You have to do some work.
Right.
So, don't go on the internet and believe 100% of what you read. I would consider it to be a data point, 1 point of data. You can talk to your college counselors, your high school counselors if you're doing that. They'll give you some information, but definitely consider it to be a data point. And
Right.
what I recommend is that whether you're thinking about skilled trades or you're thinking about going to college, I always think it's best to what I call press the flesh, shake the hands, go see the people, and find out what their experience has been. That kind of cuts through the crap. So if you're thinking about going into skilled trades and you happen to have somebody in your family circle that is a skilled trade person, ask them, you got a couple months off during the summer, ask them if you could go help them for a while and talk to them and talk to people that they work with and ask them questions like, how hard is it to get a job? How much money did you start at? How much money do you think I could possibly make? What are the benefits like? How's the work-life balance like? Is there, how do I continue my education in this skill trade if I want to? Just those things. And on the same side, on the college front, this is probably going to be a little bit harder. But if you're thinking about being a mechanical engineer, which I think is a great trade, you can just saying, you could perhaps call some companies that do mechanical engineering and tell them you're thinking about going to college and you're interested in mechanical engineering and see if you can speak with one of the principal engineers. I would be shocked if you have a lot of resistance to that. These people are busy, but do the work, put in the work to make sure that whatever career path that you're choosing is you're making that major life decision on good data, cumulative data, not just from one point. What say you, Jim?
Well, you and I have talked about it before in another life where, I had a program out in California called Regional Occupation Program in Sacramento County. And based on, I had like 8 school districts that had it. And what we did with kids is, basically give them the classroom work a couple of days a week where they would come in and learn terminology and learn safety, learn all of those basic principles of whatever trade they were interested in and had enrolled in. And then we placed them on the job site with employers. The employers had them as unpaid interns. They were put there to learn and to watch and to see. They weren't there to do the work for the guy, even though they were given an opportunity to learn some of the skills that were required. They were there to see 2 things. Number 1, how the thing worked. How did they do the job? And number 2, is that what I want to do? And if that was what they wanted to do, then they could stay with it and go into an apprenticeship program, or they could go into, stay with that employer. A lot of our kids in programs that weren't construction trades or whatever, they'd end up going to work for them. They hire them right there. They'd bring them in as an apprentice, if you will, or an intern, and they'd pay them to do work for them. So they gave them an opportunity to see, is this what I want to do? And if they didn't want to do that, they could come back and take a different course or whatever. There was no limit as to how many courses they could take in different areas till they found out the one that they really wanted to do, or if they wanted to go to college, because that was the other argument. If you're working on that work site, you're going to know, there's 25 guys out here working for the iron workers union, and you're an intern or apprentice there. You're tying iron. Oh, well, that's not a real fun job to do, is to be down the whole tying rebar together. But the bottom line is this what I want to do? There's one guy up there that's the architecture. He's got a college degree. There's 25 of us down here, and we're making not as much money, especially if we do overtime, as he's doing up there. So do I want to tie iron, or do I want to stand up there and point? And there's only one of them, and there's 25 of us. So where's the opportunity going to be? And what do I really want to do? Do I want to do that, or do I want to be the guy standing up there pointing? And if I want to do that, then I got to go a different route. There's no way in college, in high schools, it's easy to go to the career counselor and sit down and say, well, here, let's look at the college opportunities that you have. Did they ever sit down and say, let's look at the apprenticeship opportunities that you have? Is there anything, is there a test? Is there any aptitude tests for mechanical tests or anything that kids take nowadays? I don't think so. They're all pushed to college. And of course, college is the big business. College is where the money's at. So it's a, if we're going to sell kids on looking at, not selling them on going into skilled trades, if they want to, that's fine. If you're going to give them that opportunity, you got to give them the information. They've got to see it. They've got to be able to touch it. They got to be able to feel it. They got to be able to understand it before they make that decision what they want to do. And if that's kind of where we're at with this kind of thing. We're behind the eight ball because the colleges have been at it for 4 or 5 different generations, maybe 6, and we're just trying to get through to them that this is the way it needs to go. Used to be, kid grew up in a family where dad was a union carpenter or union plumber or something like that, and the kid followed the old man right into the trades, and they were legacies. The apprenticeship program, take them right in because that's Joe Blow's kid right there, Joe the plumber's kid. We'll take him right in. And nowadays that's all gone because we've all convinced all of these kids that the only way you're going to be successful is go to college. And it's not so.
So, guys, that's it for the episode today. I hope you enjoyed all this information, and stick with us. We have a couple more episodes in this series. So this week we covered the costs of going to college, how it's changed over the years and accelerated. Next week we're going to be talking about how the colleges have become obscenely rich. So we're going to look at the wages that some of these college administrators are making. We're going to be looking at a lot of details about that I think will be a little bit shocking. All right. Well, thanks much, Jim. Until next week, my friend.
Very good. Talk to you later.